The top 10 defenders in NBA history. This is a list I've wanted to make for a very long time and have continually put off because it was not an easy list to do. But this week, I got some free time with Thanksgiving break and some motivation, and so I finally sat down and made the list. So here you go. Let's start off with the honorable mentions, actually. First of all, Kawhi Leonard, Draymond Green, and Alonzo Mourning. These are the three dudes who were the absolute closest to being on this list. In fact, I had all three of them on the top 10 at one point, had to move them off. Kawhi Leonard, first of all, was solidly on there, but I had to put aside my bias, had to take him off the list just barely. He is the runner-up, though. He is the number 11. Kawhi Leonard is the best one-on-one lockdown defender in NBA history, in my opinion. Like, if you were to ask me, you're going to choose a random NBA player and I have to choose one guy to guard him, I'm taking Kawhi. This man was incredible in his defensive prime, and I don't think people remember just how good he was 5 seasons ago. He was amazing. Draymond Green, the best defensive communicator in NBA history, really helped push forward the small ball lineup thing. He's incredible, absolute beast on defense, great help defender, just barely missed the list. And Alonzo Mourning. If we are just talking pure defensive peaks, Alonzo Mourning would be on the list. However, I could not justify having him on there considering how very short his defensive prime was, and his prime in general, because of injuries and illnesses and all that. We really lost a great player far too fast because of all the off-the-court stuff with Alonzo Mourning, like health-related stuff, not like, legal issues. So, Zoe was a beast, and if we're just talking peaks, he would be on the list, but he did not make it based on my criteria. Next up, two guys with multiple Defensive Player of the Year awards in Mark Eaton and Sidney Moncrief. Both really, really great, but I just don't know if the competition was there, if the peak level defense was there. Had to keep him off. Gary Payton is the best perimeter defender in NBA history. Hands down, in my opinion. There's a lot of other guys you could give that title to, but I'm going with Gary Payton. He was incredible, but rim protection matters more, it impacts the game more, so I couldn't justify putting him on the list. Rudy Gobert, 3-time Defensive Player of the Year winner. 4 players have ever won 3 or more Defensive Player of the Year awards. Rudy Gobert is one of them. This man is incredibly underrated on defense. He is an all-time great rim protector, even if you don't want to admit it, even if you're some casual who thinks that he's the reason the Jazz lost last year in the playoffs, as if his coach didn't literally tell him to stay in the paint and not close out to the perimeter. It's not his fault his coach was an idiot, guys. It's just not. I'm sorry. What was he supposed to do? Anyway, that's something that annoys me, clearly. Rudy Gobert is an honorable mention for this list. He's an all-time great defender already. He's incredible. Patrick Ewing up next. Man always had a ton of defensive help on his teams, but he was the backbone of his team's defense. He just happened to play in an era of other amazing defensive centers, some of whom you're certainly going to see high up in the top 10 later today. He was incredible, but at the end of the day, I just don't think his defense was there, especially not on the level that New York Knicks fans would have you believe. Like, he led the Knicks to some all-time great defenses, but he had very good defensive help on his team. And I don't know, I just don't think his peak was there on the same level as some of these guys who made the list. Nate Thurmond is an incredibly underrated 60s defender. He happened to play at the same time as Chamberlain and Russell. It's unfortunate, but he was a beast on the defensive end. Never gets talked about, so look up some Nate Thurmond defensive highlights. This dude was crazy. Scottie Pippen, last but not least, for the honorable mentions, and obviously I left some people off the honorable mentions. I couldn't list every great defender ever. I'm sure there's somebody you think should have been here who wasn't. I'm sorry, I just didn't have space for everyone. So Scottie Pippen is my last honorable mention. He gets so much credit for being so good on the Bulls at defense, and most of it's deserved. Scottie Pippen's incredible, but at the end of the day, he always had great defensive help, and I don't think he's as good as a lockdown wing forward defender as Kawhi Leonard is, and since Kawhi didn't make the list, I sure as hell wasn't putting Scottie on the list. So those are my honorable mentions. Those are out of the way. That took longer than I wanted to, but I wanted to give a little bit of an explanation for each of them. Let's get into the actual list now. Starting off the top 10 is the only guy on this list who was not primarily a rim protector. Rim protection is by far the most important and most impactful aspect of defense. But Dennis Rodman the Worm was so freaking good at all-around defense, I had to put him on the list. I had to put him at number 10, and I think he absolutely deserves to be here. He won 2 Defensive Player of the Year awards over guys like Hakeem Olajuwon and Mark Eaton, and he deserved them. He freaking deserved him. He was amazing. You could put him on guards, you could put him on centers, you could obviously put him on forwards. He was good on ball, he was good off the ball. He was the best rebounder in NBA history. No, it's not a debate. No, it's not Chamberlain. It's not anybody else. It is very clearly Dennis Rodman. If you look at the stats, stop fighting me. It's Dennis Rodman. He's the best rebounder in NBA history. He had to be on this list. This man was a menace on defense. He hustled out of his mind on every single play. Well, until the late 90s when he started to party a little bit too much. But we're talking his defensive peak here, alright? This man was a crazy defender. He really did it all. You could really have Dennis Rodman guard just about anyone ever, and he would do just fine. In fact, I think he is the second most versatile defender in the top 10, only behind someone I'm going to name later. So Dennis Rodman at the number 10 spot, best rebounder of all time. I think he absolutely deserves this place, and I think he deserves to be on this list. At number 9, I am going to go with Wilt the Stilt Chamberlain. Arguably the greatest shot blocker in NBA history. This man could get so freaking high with his freakish athleticism. Maybe the only dude to ever block Kareem's skyhook, and he did it multiple times in his old age. We have stats tracked which weren't official, but suggest that he averaged around 9 blocks a game in his later years in the NBA, not even his prime. This man was incredible. He was freakishly fast, he was freakishly strong, he had an amazing vertical for someone his size. He had an amazing vertical for anyone. Like, this man had like a 40-inch vertical, maybe more. He had a freakish vertical for any human being on the planet, much less someone who was already 7'1" and one of the strongest players in NBA history as well. He was a beast. He was inhuman. And for Wilt Chamberlain to not make this list, it just wouldn't have made any sense. However, I kept him all the way down here at number 9. I say all the way down here, like being the 9th greatest defender isn't hella impressive. All the way down here at number 9 because he is one of the few guys on this list who does have legitimate flaws in his defensive game. First of all, Wilt Chamberlain tended to... Sorry, my mouth stopped working there. Anyway, back to Wilt Chamberlain, he tended to chase blocks. He could be pump faked out of position, and even though he could swat 99% of the shots that went up, the occasional time that he couldn't, he could get moved out of the way, he could jump for shots that weren't there, and this could be a slight flaw in his defensive game. He also had a little bit of an issue going for goaltends, or not going for goaltends, committing goaltends, because his arms just got up so damn high that he would block shots that weren't legally allowed to be blocked, and so that was a little bit of a problem too. And then lastly, he had a bit of an issue with fouls. Now, Wilt Chamberlain never fouled out of a game, so you might be thinking, Mike, what the fuck are you talking about? The issue was Wilt Chamberlain made a point to avoid fouling out of a game because he liked that record so much. This is something that his teammates and his opponents have talked about, where if Wilt Chamberlain would get 4 or 5 fouls and it was near the end of the game, he would just refuse to risk committing another foul, and this could lead to quote-unquote lazy defense. Now, I don't have visual evidence of this, so you can take this with a grain of salt, but I am choosing to believe what these players said, and it sounds realistic based on what we know from Wilt Chamberlain, so that is also a little bit of a flaw when it comes to his defense. So for all of those reasons, Wilt Chamberlain, the greatest athlete in NBA history, is only number 9 on my GOAT defenders list. Following up at number 8, one of the most terrifying paint presences after Wilt Chamberlain, we have Dwight Howard. This man was a beast. Superman number 2. People really seem to forget just how good Dwight Howard was in Orlando. I don't know if it's because he moved around the league and made everyone hate him everywhere, and he fell off really hard. Okay, it's probably those reasons, but Dwight Howard in Orlando, at his peak, he was incredible. He was easily the best defensive player in the league, winning 3 straight Defensive Player of the Year awards from 2009 through 2011, leading his team to a top 3 defense each one of those years, despite not really having any great defensive help on those teams. Like, they weren't the worst defensive teams in the world, but they were not remotely good ones either. He carried on the defensive end. A freak athlete, especially for his size, incredibly strong. You couldn't post him up, you couldn't throw a floater against him. No matter what you did, he was going to swat your shit out of there. He was a great rebounder. He wasn't necessarily someone who could switch onto the perimeter, but he was so fast and so freaking athletic that even if he did got beat off a switch, there was a good chance he was going to come back and swat you against the backboard anyway. Dwight Howard was a monster. He was a monster defensively, an incredibly intimidating presence for any opposing player in the late 2000s to drive into the paint against, and I think he belongs here at number 8. Entering the top 7. The most frustrating top 7 that I have ever made, for sure, because talk about splitting hairs between these next 4 players. You really could put any of them in any order, these next 4 guys that is, and it would be fine. It would be totally fine with me. I couldn't fight you on it. They're so close. They are so close. But I am going with Dikembe Mutombo at number 7. He has 4 Defensive Player of the Year awards with 3 different teams. He has amazing defensive longevity, and he has the best defensive celebration in NBA history with the finger wag, something people have been trying to copy for the last 30 years. He's iconic. He is an iconic defensive player, and his story's really funny to me because he entered college planning to be a doctor and came out, went to the NBA, and then won 4 Defensive Player of the Year awards. Like, he legitimately went to college planning to be a doctor, and the coach was just like, hey, you're tall, you should play basketball, and he became one of the best defenders ever. Like, what the hell, Dikembe? That's an insane story to me, but Mutombo, he was a beast. I mean, he was a beast. 4 Defensive Player of the Awards, tied for most all time. I really can't talk tonight, I'm sorry about that. This man was an absolute monster. The only thing holding him back for me is just, I don't think he has that, like, one extra factor that puts him over the guys I had ahead of him. Like, he was primarily a post defender. He wasn't really a versatile dude. I don't think his defense was anything special. Like, despite the fact that he was absolutely amazing on defense, he never led his teams to, like, some historic defense. He never had, like some crazy, like, defensive-based playoff run or anything. And I just don't think he did some extra thing on defense that puts him over any of the 6 guys I had ahead of him, even though his longevity was great and his peak was great. I just have to put Dikembe at number 7, but it's super duper close. I could very easily put him at number 3, and if I remade this list in a week, I might, who knows. But for now, we've got him at number 7. That's Dikembe Mutombo, Mr. Fingerwag. Coming in at number 6, which somehow feels criminally low for this dude, I'm gonna put Kevin Garnett. Maybe the most versatile defender in NBA history. Somehow only had 1 DPOY, Kevin Garnett. You could put him on centers, and he would block them. You could put him on forwards, and he would lock them down. And you could put him on guards, and he would clamp them up. He would shut down their drives. He would steal the ball from them. He could guard literally anyone, and it would not be a mismatch. This dude was insane. He was an underrated athlete. He was an absurd hustler, probably the most, okay, that might be a stretch, but legitimately one of the most effort-giving players in NBA history. Yes, that's definitely how I wanted to phrase that sentence. He gave so much effort on the defensive end, on every end, but especially on defense. He never took a playoff. He was never going to let his man out of his sight, let his man just get an easy bucket. No. Kevin Garnett was a freaking madman on the defensive end. He had incredibly fast hands. He was great at stealing the ball, especially for someone his size. He could get blocks. He could do it all. He could do freaking everything on defense. The one thing holding him back from being maybe freaking number 1 on this list goes with what I said earlier, and that is rim protection overall. And while Kevin Garnett was a very, very good rim protector, I don't believe he was a GOAT level rim protector, and that is what holds him back for me. He is an amazing defensive player. He absolutely deserved that Defensive Player of the Year award in 2008. He probably deserved one of the Timberwolves earlier, if we're being totally honest, just because of how hard he was carrying that scrub team. And I think he deserved the Finals MVP in 2008 as well, because of how well he locked down Pau Gasol. This man was a defensive monster. He was a nutcase. And he deserves to be on this list. It really feels wrong not having him top 5, but here he is, Kevin Garnett, only at number 6 on my greatest defenders list. So, who could I possibly rank over Kevin Garnett as a defender? Well, Let's start off with number 5 on my list. That is David Robinson, the Admiral. This man was an incredible defender. I feel like I've said that a lot today, but it's true for every single one of these guys, and it's definitely true for David Robinson. One of the best shot blockers in league history, combined with great defensive IQ and amazing reaction time and athleticism. This dude had freakishly long arms, he could jump from a standing position and get super high very, very fast. Like, literally watching some of his blocks, they don't make sense, because you see, if you watch him in, like, slow motion, you see the guy going to shoot, and you're looking at Robinson, and it's like, oh, he doesn't have a way to block that shot. He's not ready, he's not in position, and then, 0.5 seconds later, he's swatting this shot away from the rim, because he just gets up there in no time flat. It's crazy. He is one of the best rim protectors in NBA history, with the only flaw in his game being that because his reaction time was so amazing, he could be pump faked by elite post players, specifically Hakeem Olajuwon, who kind of owned his ass in 1995. But that guy aside, okay, because Hakeem Olajuwon owned everybody's ass in 1995, taking that playoff series aside, David Robinson was something else. He carried the Spurs on defense throughout the 90s, and you can see in 1997, when the team was the worst defense in the entire league and Robinson only played 6 games, just how awful this team would have been without him playing defense all those years. He was really carrying a bum defensive team out here. He really was, and he was making them one of, if not the best defenses in the entire NBA. It's kind of insane that he only has one Defensive Player of the Year award, and man, absolute defensive monster. Maybe not the greatest perimeter defender, but not someone who would be a nightmare out there either, simply because he was so fast, so long, and so athletic. David Robinson is the number 5 defender on my GOAT defenders list. I think he deserves to be over Kevin Garnett, but like, I've said this a million times already, splitting hairs here. You could put KG over him, it would be fine, but I think David Robinson just barely edges him out for the rim protecting difference. At number 4 on my list, the other guy who happens to have 4 Defensive Player of the Years, tied for the most all time, Ben Wallace. What a freaking monster. I made a video on him very recently talking about how great he was, so I'm not going to go too in detail on him here, but that video was the inspiration for this. I talked about him and I was like, man, I really need to rank these guys. Ben Wallace was an absolute freaking beast in his defensive prime, which unfortunately wasn't very long, similar to a guy like Alonzo Mourning. Difference is, Ben Wallace managed to win 4 Defensive Player of the Year awards in that time span over dudes like Kevin Garnett and Tim Duncan. He was a monster. He carried the Pistons defensively, and I know they had a lot of other great defenders on that team, but you can see how much worse they got on defense when he left, and he immediately turned the Chicago Bulls into a historic level great defense when he joined that team. Ben Wallace was an absolute monster. He could switch onto the perimeter. He had very good hands. He got a lot of steals. He got a lot of blocks. He was strong enough to shut down anyone in NBA history not named Shaq in the post, because even though he was only 6'9", he was literally too freaking muscular. Like, I would love to see an arm wrestling match between this dude and Wilt Chamberlain. I don't know who would win. They were probably the 2 strongest players ever. Ben Wallace was a defensive freak. I think he would be even better in today's game because of his size and his switchability, his athleticism, the way he played help defense. He would have been even better today in this era of small ball. Would have loved to see Ben Wallace, but sadly we only got to see him in an era where he was playing against a bunch of dudes who were way taller than him and should have been whooping his ass in the post, and they didn't because he was so freaking good on defense. Ben Wallace is at number 4 for me, and the thing holding him back, it's longevity. Yeah, longevity held Alonzo off this list, and he held Ben Wallace at only number 4. Because if we're talking defensive peaks, you might have a case for Ben Wallace to be number 1 if he happened to have like some 15-year crazy defensive peak, but it was only about 7 or 8 seasons, and because of that, I'm gonna keep Ben Wallace all the way down at the number 4 spot on this list. At number 3, let's talk about a player who is pretty much the exact opposite of Ben Wallace, excluding the fact that they were both amazingly good on defense. This man had 0 Defensive Player of the Year awards, but 15 all-defense teams, the most all-time, and also the best defensive longevity in NBA history. I am, of course, talking about Tim Duncan, an incredibly underrated player both on defense and in general, one of my favorite players all time. I am a huge Tim Duncan fan, and I will never get over the fact that this man did not win a single Defensive Player of the Year award in his career. Now, I'm not saying Ben Wallace robbed him of any of those awards, because in the years Ben Wallace won, I can't say that Ben Wallace didn't deserve it. He really did. He was something else. But Tim Duncan absolutely deserved the Defensive Player of the Year award in 2004. Okay? Because he led the Spurs to the best defense in NBA history that season. Relative to league average, they were the best defense in the history of the NBA, and Tim Duncan was the backbone of that. David Robinson wasn't even on the team anymore, man. He wasn't even on the team anymore, and Tim Duncan carried that defense so freaking hard. And it's not like that team was an atrocious defense or anything, but come on now, Tim Duncan was carrying. This dude started his career playing out of position at power forward, so people don't seem to realize just how good of a shot blocker he was. Like, he's one of the best shot blockers all time, just looking at his stats. Even when you ignore the fact that he was playing power forward, he was not the primary rim protector on his team at the start of his career. Just think about how many more blocks he would have had if he was playing center from the get-go. This man was an amazing help defender, he was an amazing rim protector. Again, 15 all-defense teams. That's the most all-time by 3. Okay? In terms of accolades, having 3 more than who's ever is number 2 all-time in something is a massive amount. Like, that's crazy. I don't know who has the most All-NBA teams or All-Star teams all time, but I guarantee you they don't have as many as 3 more than whoever is in second. That is an absurd number. Tim Duncan's longevity was absolutely incredible, and at his defensive peak, again, not only did he lead the Spurs to the best defense in NBA history, he led the Spurs to 3 different top 8 defenses in NBA history. Yes, one of those was in 1999 when he was playing with David Robinson. One of those was in 2016 with Kawhi Leonard. But the point is, Tim Duncan was at the center of all of those things. He was an incredible defender. His team, aside from the many other accomplishments Tim Duncan led them to, never had a below-average defense while he played for them. Defensive longevity gets Tim Duncan to number 3. Not that he didn't have a top 10 defensive peak, which he absolutely did, but it's the defensive longevity that puts him over these other few guys for me. He was incredible. He had the best defensive longevity in NBA history. I will die on the hill that Tim Duncan deserved a Defensive Player of the Year award. It's insane that he never got one. He is by far the best defender to never get one when the award existed. Tim Duncan's a beast, and I have him at number 3. I think he absolutely deserves it. Number 1 and number 2 on this list are pretty much interchangeable. They are clearly, in my opinion, the 2 best defenders in league history, and they are pretty much interchangeable. I really struggled with who to put at number 1 and who to put at number 2. And at the end of the day, gun to my head after a whole lot of research, I had to go with Hakeem Olajuwon as the second best defender in NBA history. It was a really difficult decision. I had him at number 1 for a very long time, but I think Hakeem fits just fine here at number 2. And for the record, if you think he's number 1, I will not fight you whatsoever, because if you ask me 2 days from now, I very well might have Hakeem at number 1 by that time. It's that close. It really is that close. But Hakeem is at number 2 for me, because in terms of defensive peak, he has the best one I think we've ever seen. I think he does. His defensive peak in the early 90s was truly something else. In his 80s days, he was at his athleticism peak, but his defensive IQ was not at its peak yet. However, in the 90s, he became an incredibly smart defender. You would not catch him out of position. You would not catch him jumping for pump fakes and doing dumb things on the defensive end. He got a ton of steals. He obviously got a ton of blocks. He was a great rebounder as well. His positioning was incredible. His athleticism was there. Even as it started to fall off in the later 90s, it was still something else. He absolutely deserved his Defensive Player of the Year awards, and he kept his team as a very good defense, despite the fact that he did not have much defensive help on his team for the majority of his prime. When Sampson got hurt, and before they got Drexler, this was not a team with a lot of defensive help around Olajuwon, and yet he was carrying them on the defensive end every single season. This man was a menace, an incredibly smart defender. He could do anything you wanted. He could switch to the perimeter, not quite on the level of a Kevin Garnett, but absolutely on an elite level. His rim protection was insane. He was tall, he was long, he was athletic, he was smart. There were really no weaknesses in Hakeem Olajuwon's defensive game. There really weren't. There were no defensive weaknesses that I could point out. He does everything you could possibly want from a defender. Why the hell isn't he number one? Well, the reason he's not number one is because you just can't argue with Bill Russell. Sometimes Bill Russell is just the best ever at something, and you just got to accept that, because what the hell are you going to say to a man who led his team to 11 rings without being a good offensive player? He was purely a defensive player, and he was the best there ever was. Throughout his entire career, he carried the Celtics to historic all-time great defenses. They immediately became an elite defense when he was drafted after being a bad one, and they immediately fell off to a below-average defense when he retired, while he carried them the entire time. This team was very, very good on offense, but at the end of the day, they were a defense-first team. The Celtics of the 60s, their calling card was their defense, and Bill Russell was far and away the best defender on that team. Not to mention, in the NBA as a whole, in an era of great defensive centers, this was the dude who was clamping Wilt Chamberlain in the playoffs. He was shutting down everybody. He was literally the dude who popularized jumping for blocks. He was incredible on the defensive end. Arguably the greatest defender of all time, one of the greatest rebounders of all time. He could switch onto the perimeter, and I don't believe he was as good as like a Kevin Garnett or even a Ben Wallace, but for his era, he was absolutely the best, most switchable defender out there. You can see clips of him getting on guards. He was freakishly fast, freakishly athletic. He had an amazing jump height. I think he won an Olympic medal for leaping or something, despite being like 6'10", 6'11". He was absurd. He was another inhuman dude, and if he played next to literally anyone except for Wilt Chamberlain, we would talk about it way more. He may be the second greatest athlete in NBA history, and we just don't know because Wilt Chamberlain was not human. But Bill Russell, in terms of defense, was not human. The way that he carried the Celtics on that end, the way that he carried the entire league on that end for his entire 13-year career, it's something else. We have never seen defensive dominance on the level of Bill Russell, and I seriously doubt we ever will again. This man had the longevity, and pretty much that entire time, he was at his peak on defense. He was amazing. He was amazing every single night on that end. That was what led the Celtics to 11 rings. It wasn't the fact that his team was stacked. I mean, that helped. It helped. But the main fact here was that Bill Russell was amazing on defense. I have him at number one, and I really wanted to put Hakeem there. Hakeem was my pick before I actually made this list, but when I looked into it more and more, I just can't argue against Bill Russell. I just can't make a real argument against Bill Russell being number one, so he is my pick, and I hope you all enjoyed this list. If you did, please like the video. Let me know in the comments what you would disagree with, what you'd move around. I appreciate your comments as long as you're not calling me a dumbass or anything. I put a massive amount of work into this video. This was very tiring to make. Obviously, it's a very long video. Took a lot of research, took a lot of recording time, took a lot of editing time. Please, please, please like the video if you enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end, and have a good Thanksgiving break, everyone.